Racism. It's a word that carries weight, a word that evokes pain, anger, and frustration. It's a system of oppression that has plagued humanity for far too long, dividing us along arbitrary lines of color and ethnicity. But where does this insidious ideology come from? How does it take root in the human psyche, poisoning our perceptions and shaping our interactions with the world? The truth is, racism is not innate. It's not something we're born with. Rather, it's a learned behavior, a toxic inheritance passed down from generation to generation. From a young age, we're bombarded with messages, both explicit and implicit, that reinforce racial hierarchies and stereotypes. These messages seep into our subconscious, coloring our worldview and influencing our thoughts, feelings, and actions. We see it in the subtle ways people treat each other, in the assumptions they make, in the jokes they tell. We see it in the systemic inequalities that persist in our institutions, in the disparities in education, healthcare, and criminal justice. And we see it in the blatant acts of discrimination and violence that continue to plague our society. But racism isn't just about individual acts of prejudice. It's about a system of power that privileges some groups over others, a system that has been built and maintained over centuries. To dismantle this system, we need to understand its roots, its mechanisms, and its insidious effects. We need to shine a light on the dark corners of our history and confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society. Imagine a child, their mind a blank slate, eager to learn and explore the world around them. From the moment they're born, they're absorbing information, processing language, and making sense of their surroundings. And all too often those surroundings are steeped in subtle and not so subtle forms of racism. Children are like sponges, soaking up everything they see and hear. They learn from their parents, their families, their friends, their teachers, and the media they consume. And if they are constantly exposed to racist attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, those ideas can become ingrained in their developing minds. It might be a casual comment about someone's appearance, a joke that relies on racial stereotypes, or a news report that portrays certain groups in a negative light. These seemingly small moments can have a profound impact on a child's understanding of race and their place in the world. And as children grow older, these early lessons can harden into deeply held beliefs. They may start to internalize the messages they've been exposed to, leading to feelings of superiority or inferiority based solely on their race. If childhood is the fertile ground where the seeds of racism are sown, then media, culture, and politics are the sun, water, and fertilizer that help those seeds grow into deeply rooted prejudices. These powerful forces shape our perceptions of the world, influencing our attitudes and behaviors in ways we may not even realize. Think about the movies we watch, the music we listen to, the news we consume. How often are people of color portrayed as complex, nuanced individuals with their own stories to tell? Or are they relegated to stereotypical roles, their humanity diminished to fit into narrow boxes defined by race? From the blatant racism of blackface and minstrel shows to the more insidious forms of cultural appropriation and tokenism, media has a long and sordid history of perpetuating harmful stereotypes and reinforcing racial hierarchies. And these representations have real-world consequences, shaping our perceptions of different racial groups and influencing our interactions with them. Politics, too, plays a role in perpetuating racism. From dog-whistle politics that exploit racial anxieties to policies that disproportionately harm communities of color, the political sphere is often a battleground where racial divisions are exploited for power and gain. You'd think that in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, racism would crumble like a house of cards. After all, we live in an age of unprecedented access to information. We can travel the world, connect with people from all walks of life, and expand our understanding of the human experience like never before. And yet, racism persists. Despite mountains of scientific evidence debunking racial superiority, despite countless stories of resilience and achievement from marginalized communities, despite the clear and present dangers of prejudice and discrimination, the racist mindset endures. Why? Because racism isn't really about logic or reason. It's about power, privilege, and the deep-seated human need to feel superior to others. It's about clinging to a worldview that justifies inequality and protects the status quo. To truly understand the persistence of racism, we need to delve into the psychological factors that contribute to prejudice. At its core, racism is often rooted in fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the other, fear of losing power and privilege. This fear can manifest in different ways. It can lead to suspicion, distrust, and hostility towards those perceived as different. It can fuel the desire to control and dominate others, to maintain a sense of order and hierarchy. And it can drive people to cling even tighter to their prejudices when their worldview is challenged. Ignorance, too, plays a role in perpetuating racism. When we lack exposure to diverse perspectives and experiences, it's easy to fall prey to stereotypes and generalizations. We may make assumptions about entire groups of people based on limited information, perpetuating harmful myths and misconceptions. The fight against racism begins with self-reflection. It requires us to examine our own biases, to confront the ways in which we may have internalized racist ideas, and to acknowledge the role we may play in perpetuating systems of oppression. This can be uncomfortable work, but it's essential if we want to create a more just and equitable world. Here are a few questions to ask yourself. Do I make assumptions about people based on their race or ethnicity? Do I harbor any conscious or unconscious biases towards certain racial groups? Do I ever laugh at or make jokes that perpetuate racial stereotypes? Am I aware of my own privilege and how it may affect my interactions with others? Do I actively seek out diverse perspectives and challenge my own biases? Recognizing our own biases is just the first step. We also need to be willing to confront racism in our families, our communities, and our society as a whole. This means speaking out against prejudice and discrimination, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. It means challenging racist jokes and stereotypes, educating ourselves and others about the history and impact of racism, and supporting policies and initiatives that promote racial justice. And it means holding ourselves and each other accountable for our words and actions, creating a culture where racism is not tolerated in any form. Dismantling racism is not just about tearing down walls of prejudice, it's also about building bridges of understanding, empathy and compassion. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of the color of their skin. This requires a multifaceted approach that addresses both individual biases and systemic inequalities. We need to invest in education that promotes diversity and inclusion, create economic opportunities for marginalized communities, and reform our criminal justice system to eliminate racial disparities. The fight against racism is not a sprint, it's a marathon. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way, moments of despair and frustration, but we cannot allow ourselves to become discouraged or complacent. The struggle for racial justice is a continuous journey, one that requires sustained effort, unwavering commitment, and a belief in the possibility of a better future. It's a journey we must all take together, hand in hand, until we create a world where the color of our skin no longer determines our opportunities or our worth.